the Toad Woman. Great good luck once happened to a young woman who was living all alone in the woods with nobody near her but her little dog, for she found fresh meat every morning at her door. She was much surprised and very curious to know who it was that supplied her. So she watched one morning, just as the sun had risen, and saw a handsome young man gliding away into the forest. Having seen her, he became her husband, and they had a son. One evening not long after this, he did not return as usual from hunting. She waited till late at night, but he came not at all. The next day she swung her child to sleep in his cradle, and then said to her dog, "Take care of your brother while I am gone, and when he cries, halloo for me." The cradle was made of the finest wampum, and all its bandages and ornaments were of the same precious stuff. After a short time the woman heard the cry of the dog, and running home as fast as she could, she found her child gone, and the dog too. On looking around, she saw scattered upon the ground pieces of the wampum of her child's cradle, and she knew that the dog had been faithful, and had striven his best to save the babe from being carried off. Now the thief was an old woman from a distant country, called Mindamoya, or the Toad Woman. The mother hurried off at full speed in pursuit of her. As she flew along, she came from time to lodges inhabited by old women, who told her at what time the child thief had passed. They also gave her shoes that she might follow on. A number of these old women seemed to be prophetesses, and knew what was to come long beforehand. Each of them would say to her that when she had arrived at the next lodge, she must set the toes of the moccasins they had given her pointing homeward, and that they would then return of themselves. The young woman was very careful to send back in this manner all the shoes she borrowed. She thus followed in the pursuit, from valley to valley and stream to stream for many months and years, and at length came to the lodge of the last of the friendly old grandmothers, as they were called, who gave her final instructions how to proceed. She told the mother that she was near the place where her son was to be found, and she directed her to build a lodge of cedar boughs hard by the old Toad Woman's lodge, and to make a little bark dish, and to fill it with the juice of the wild grape. "Then," she said, "your first child, meaning the dog, will come and find you out." These directions the young woman followed just as they had been given to her, and in a short time she heard her son, now grown up, going out to hunt. The dog was following, and she called out to him, "Pee-Walbick, Spirit Iron, twee-twee." The dog came into the lodge, and she set before him the dish of grape juice. "See, my child," she said, addressing him, "the pretty drink your mother gives you." Spirit Iron took a long draught, and immediately left the lodge with his eyes wide open, for this was the drink which teaches one to see the truth of things as they are. He rose up when he got into the open air, stood upon his hind legs, and looked about. "I see how it is," he said, and marching off erect as a man, he sought out his young master. Approaching him in great confidence, he bent down and whispered in his ear, having first looked cautiously around to see that no one was listening, "This old woman here in the lodge is no mother of yours. I have found your real mother, and she is worth looking at. When we come back from our day's sport, I'll prove it to you." They went out into the woods, and at the close of the afternoon they brought back a great spoil of meat of all kinds. Then the young man, as soon as he had laid aside his weapons, said to the old Toad Woman, "Send some of the best of this meat to the stranger who has arrived lately." The Toad Woman answered, "No, why should I send to her, the poor widow?" But the young man would not be refused, and at last the old Toad Woman consented to take something and throw it down at the door. "My son gives you this," she called out. But being bewitched by Mindamoya, the meat was so bitter and distasteful that the young woman immediately cast it out of the lodge after her. In the evening, the young man paid the stranger a visit at her lodge of cedar hops. She then told him that she was his real mother, and that he had been stolen away from her by the old Toad Woman, who was a child thief and a witch. As the young man appeared to doubt, she said to him, "Feign yourself sick when you go home to her lodge, and when the Toad Woman asks what ails you, say that you wish to see your cradle, for your cradle was of wampum, and your faithful brother, the dog, in striving to save you, tore off these pieces which I show you. They were real wampum, white and blue, shining and beautiful, and the young man, placing them in his bosom, set off. He did not seem quite steady in his belief of the strange woman's story. But the dog, Spirit Iron, taking his arm, kept close by his side and gave him many words of encouragement as they went along. They entered the lodge together, and the old Toad Woman saw from something in the dog's eye that trouble was coming. "Mother," said the young man, placing his hand to his head and leaning heavily upon Spirit Iron, as if a sudden faintness had come upon him, "why am I so different in looks from the rest of your children?" "Oh," she answered, "there was a very bright, clear blue sky when you were born. That is the reason." He seemed to be so very ill that the Toad Woman at length asked what she could do for him. He said that nothing could do him good but the sight of his cradle. She ran immediately and brought a cedar cradle, but he said, "That is not my cradle." She went and got another of her own children's cradles, of which there were 4, but he turned his head and said, "That is not mine. I am as sick as ever." When she had shown the 4, and they had all been rejected, she at last produced the real cradle. The young man saw that it was of the same stuff as the wampum which he had in his bosom. He could even see the marks of the teeth of Spirit Iron left upon the edges, where he had taken hold, striving to hold it back. So he had no doubt now which was his mother. To get free of the old Toad Woman, it was necessary that the young man should kill a fat bear, and being directed by Spirit Iron, who was very wise in such a matter, he secured the fattest in all that country. Having stripped a tall pine of all its bark and branches, he perched the carcass in the top, with its head to the east and its tail due west. Then, returning to the lodge, he informed the old Toad Woman that the fat here was ready for her, but that to get it she would have to go very far, even to the end of the earth. She answered, "It is not so far, but that I can get it." For of all things in the world, a fat bear was the delight of the old Toad Woman. She at once set forth, and she was no sooner out of sight than the young man and his dog Spirit Iron blew a strong breath in the face of the Toad Woman's 4 children, who were all bad spirits or bear fiends, and so put out their life. Then, setting them up by the side of the door, they thrust a piece of the white bear fat in each of their mouths. The Toad Woman spent a long time in finding the bear which she had been sent after, and she made at least 25 attempts before she was able to climb to the carcass. She slipped down 3 times where she went up once, but at last she succeeded and returned with the great bear on her back. As she drew near her lodge, she was astonished to see the 4 children standing up by the doorpost with the fat in their mouths. She was angry with them and called out, "Why do you thus insult the pomatum of your brother?" She was still more angry when they made no answer to her complaint, but when she found that they were stark dead and had been placed in this way to mock her, her fury was very great indeed. She ran after the tracks of the young man and his mother as fast as she could, so fast indeed that she was on the very point of overtaking them, when the dog, Spirit Iron, coming close up to his master, whispered to him, "Snakeberry! Let the Snakeberry spring up to detain her!" cried out the young man, and immediately the berries spread for a long distance like scarlet all over the path, and the old Toad Woman, who was almost as fond of these berries as she was of fat bears, could not avoid stooping down to pick and eat. Original. The old Toad Woman was very anxious to get forward, but the snakeberry vines kept spreading out on every side, and they grew and grew and spread, and to this day the wicked old Toad Woman is busy picking the berries. She will never be able to get beyond to the other side to disturb the happiness of the young hunter and his mother, who still live with their faithful dog in the shadow of the beautiful woodside where they were born. The origin of the robin. An old man had an only son named Iadea, who had come to that age when it is thought to be time for a boy to make the long and final fast, which is to secure through life a guardian genius or spirit. The father was ambitious that his son should surpass all others in whatever was deemed wisest and greatest among his people. He thought it necessary that the young Iadea, to do this, should fast a much longer time than any of those renowned for their power or wisdom. The father therefore directed his son to prepare with great ceremony for the important event. First, he was to go several times to the sweating lodge and bath, which were to prepare and purify him for communion with his good spirit. Then he was to lie down upon a clean mat in a little lodge expressly provided for him. He was especially enjoined at the same time to endure his fast like a man, and promised that at the end of 12 days he should receive food and the blessing of his father. The lad carefully observed these commands, and lay with his face covered, calmly awaiting the approach of the Spirit, which was to decide his good or evil fortune for all the days of his life. Every morning his father came to the door of the little lodge and encouraged him to persevere, dwelling at length on the vast honor and renown that must ever attend him, should he accomplish the full term of trial allotted to him. To these glowing words of promise and glory the boy never replied, but he lay without the least sign of discontent or murmuring until the 9th day, when he addressed his father as follows: "My father, my dreams forebode evil. May I break my fast now, and at a more favorable time make a new fast?" The father answered, "My son, you know not what you ask. If you get up now, all your glory will depart. Wait patiently a little longer. You have but 3 days more, and your term will be completed. You know it is for your own good, and I encourage you to persevere. Shall not your aged father live to see you a star among the chieftains, and the beloved of battle?" The son assented, and covering himself more closely, that he might shut out the light which prompted him to complain, he lay till the 11th day, when he repeated his request. The father addressed Iadiah as he had the day before, and promised that he would himself prepare his first meal, and bring it to him by the dawn of the next morning. The son moaned, and the father added, "Will you bring shame upon your father when he is falling in the west?" "I will not shame you, my father," replied Iadiah. He lay so still and motionless that you could only know that he was living by the gentle heaving of his chest. At the spring of day, the father, delighted at having gained his end, prepared a repast for his son and hastened to set it before him. But on coming to the door of Reed Little Lodge, he was surprised to hear his son talking to himself. He stooped his ear to listen, and looking through a small opening, was yet more astonished when he beheld his son painted with vermilion over all his breast. He was just in the act of finishing his work by laying on the paint as far back on his shoulders as he could reach, saying at the same time to himself, "My father has destroyed my fortune as a man. He would not listen to my requests. He has urged me beyond my tender strength. He will be the loser. I shall be forever happy in my new state, for I have been obedient to my parent. He alone will be the sufferer, for my guardian spirit is a just one. Though not propitious to me in the manner I desired, he has shown me pity in another way. He has given me another shape, and now I must go." At this moment the old man broke in, exclaiming, "My son, my son, I pray you leave me not." But the young man, with the quickness of a bird, had flown to the top of the lodge and perched himself on the highest pole, having been changed into a beautiful robin redbreast. He looked down upon his father with pity beaming in his eyes, and addressed him as follows: "Regret not, my father, the change you behold. I shall be happier in my present state than I could have been as a man. I shall always be the friend of men, and keep near their dwellings. I shall ever be happy and contented, and although I could not be a mighty warrior as you wished, it will be my daily aim to make you amends for it as a harbinger of peace and joy. I will cheer you by my songs, and strive to inspire in others the joy and lightsomeness of heart I feel in my present state. This will be some compensation to you for the loss of glory you expected. I am now free from the cares and pains of human life. My food is spontaneously furnished by the mountains and fields, and my path of fife is in the bright air." Then, stretching himself on his toes, as if delighted with the gift of wings, Iadiah caroled one of his sweetest songs and flew away into a neighboring wood. White Feather and the 6 Giants. There was an old man living in the depth of a forest with his grandson, whom he had taken in charge when quite an infant. The child had no parents, brothers, or sisters. They had all been destroyed by 6 large giants, and he was informed that he had no other relative living besides his grandfather. The band of Indians to whom he had belonged had put up their children on a wager in a race against those of the giants, and had thus lost them. But there was an old tradition in the tribe that one day it would produce a great man who would wear a white feather, and who would astonish everyone by his feats of skill and bravery. The grandfather, as soon as the child could play about, gave him a bow and arrows to amuse himself with. He went into the edge of the woods one day and saw a rabbit, but not knowing what it was, he ran home and described it to his grandfather, who told him that its flesh was good to eat, and that if he would shoot one of his arrows into its body, he would kill it. The boy went out again and brought home the little animal, which he asked his grandfather to boil, that they might feast on it. The old man humored the boy in this and encouraged him to go on acquiring the knowledge of hunting until he could kill deer and the larger kinds of game. And thus he became, as he grew up, an expert hunter. As they lived alone and away from other Indians, the curiosity of the stripling was excited to know what was passing in the world. One day he came to the edge of a prairie, where he saw ashes like those at his grandfather's lodge, and lodge poles left standing. He returned and inquired whether his grandfather had put up the poles and made the fire. "No," answered the old man, "nor do I believe that you have seen anything of the kind. You must have lost your sense to be thinking of such things." Another day the youth went out to see what there was within a day's hunt that was curious, and on entering the woods he heard a voice calling out to him, "Come here, you who are destined to wear the white feather. You do not wear it yet, but you are worthy of it. Return home and take a short nap. You will dream of hearing a voice which will tell you to rise and smoke. You will see in your dream a pipe, a smoking sack, and a large white feather. When you awake, you will find these articles. Put the feather on your head, and you will become a great hunter, a great warrior, and a great man, able to do anything. As a proof that these things shall come to pass, when you smoke, the smoke will turn into pigeons." The voice then informed the youth who he was, and made known the character of his grandfather, who was imposing upon him to serve his own ends. The voice spirit then caused a vine to be laid at his side, and told him that he was now of an age to avenge the wrongs of his kindred. "When you meet your enemy," the spirit added, "you will run a race with him. He will not see the vine because it is enchanted. While you are running, you will throw it over his head and entangle him, so that you will win the race." Long before this speech was ended, the youth had turned to the quarter from which the voice proceeded, and was astonished to behold a man. As yet he had never seen any human being besides his grandfather. As he looked more keenly, he saw that this man, who had the looks of great age, was wood from the breast downward, and that he appeared to be fixed in the earth. As the youth's eye dwelt upon this strange being, the countenance by degrees faded away, and when he advanced to the spot whence it had addressed him, it was gone. He returned home, slept, and in the midst of his slumbers, as from the hollow of the air, heard the voice, wakened, and found the promised gifts. It was all just as the old man had said. The grandfather, on awakening, was greatly surprised to find the youth with a white feather on his forehead, and to see flocks of pigeons flying out of the lodge. He then remembered the old tradition, and knowing that now the day had come when he should lose control of his charge, he bitterly bewailed the hour. Possessed of his 3 magic gifts, the young man departed the next morning to seek his enemies and to demand revenge. The 6 giants lived in a very high lodge in the middle of a wood. He traveled on with good heart till he reached this lodge, where he found that his coming had been made known by the little spirits who carried the news. The giants hastened out and gave a cry of joy as they saw him drawing near. When he approached within hail, they began to make sport of him, saying, "Here comes the little man with the white feather, who is to achieve such wonderful wonders." When, however, he had arrived among them, they spoke him fair, saying he was a brave man and would do brave things. Their object was to encourage him, so that he would be bold to engage in some foolhardy trial of strength. Without paying much heed to their fine speeches, White Feather went fearlessly into their lodge, and without waiting for invitation, he challenged them to a foot match. They agreed, and by way of being easy at first, told him to begin the race with the smallest of their number. The point to which they were to run was a peeled tree toward the rising sun, and then back to the starting place, which was a war club of iron. Whoever won this stake was empowered to use it in dispatching the defeated champion. If White Feather should overcome the first giant, he was to try the second, and so on, until they had all measured speed with him. To this the giants agreed without a thought that he would survive the first trial. But White Feather feared nothing, and by a dexterous use of the vine gained the race, struck down his competitor, and cut off his head. The next morning he raced with the second giant, whom he also outran, killed, and beheaded. He went on in this way for 5 mornings, always conquering by the aid of his vine, and lopping off the heads of the vanquished. Finally, the last of the giants who was yet to run with him acknowledged his power, but prepared secretly to deceive him. By way of parley, he proposed that White Feather should leave the heads with him, and offered to give him a handsome start for odds. This White Feather declined, as he preferred to keep the heads as trophies of his victory. On his way to the giant's lodge the 6th morning, White Feather met his old counselor in the woods. He was standing rooted in the earth as before. He told White Feather that he was about to give him a word of warning. "On your way this morning," he said, "you will meet the most beautiful woman in the world, but do not trust her or pay the least attention to her. As soon as you catch her eye, you must wish yourself changed into an elk. The change will take place immediately. Do not look at her again." White Feather thanked his kind adviser, who even as he spoke was disappearing as before, then proceeded toward the lodge. He had not gone far before he met the maiden, who was indeed as lovely as the morning's light. This was White Feather's first sight of a maiden, and he was greatly disposed to linger. But remembering the counselor's words, he lost no time in becoming an elk. At this the maiden began to reproach him that he had cast aside the form of a man so that he might avoid her. "I have traveled a great distance," she said, "to see you and to become your wife, for I have heard of your great achievements and admire you very much." Now this woman was the 6th giant, who had assumed this disguise to entrap White Feather. But without a suspicion of her real character, her reproaches and her beauty affected him so deeply that he wished himself a man again, and at once resumed his natural shape. Then they sat down and began to talk together. Soothed by her smiles and gracious manner, he laid his head on her lap, and in a little while fell into a deep slumber. Even then, such was her fear of White Feather, she doubted whether his sleep might not be feigned. To assure herself, she pushed his head aside, and seeing that he remained unconscious, she quickly assumed the form of the 6th giant. He took the plume from the brow of White Feather and placed it upon his own head. Then with a sudden blow of his war club, the giant changed White Feather into a dog, in which form he followed his enemy to the lodge. While these things were passing, there were living in an Indian village at some distance 2 sisters, the daughters of a chief. These sisters were rivals, and they were at that very time fasting to acquire power for enticing the wearer of the White Feather to visit their lodge. They each secretly hoped to win his love, and each had built a lodge on the border of the village encampment. The giant, knowing this and having become possessed of the magic plume, went immediately to visit them. As he approached, the sisters, who were on the lookout at their lodge doors, espied and recognized the feather. The elder sister had prepared her lodge with great show and all the finery she could command, so as to attract the eye. The younger touched nothing in her lodge, but left it in its ordinary state. The elder went out to meet the giant and invited him in. He accepted her invitation and made her his wife. The younger sister invited the enchanted dog into her lodge, prepared him a good supper and a neat bed, and treated him with much attention. The giant, supposing that whoever possessed the White Feather possessed also all its virtues, went out upon the prairie to hunt, hallooing aloud to the game to come and be killed. But the great hubbub he kept up scared them away, and he returned at night with nothing but himself, for he had shouted so lustily all day long that he had been obliged to leave even the mighty halloo behind. The dog went out the same day hunting upon the banks of a river. He stole quietly along to a certain spot, and stepping into the water drew out a stone, which instantly became a beaver. The next day the giant followed the dog, and hiding behind a tree, watched the manner in which the dog hunted in the river, and drew out a stone, which at once turned into a beaver. "Aha!" said the giant to himself, "I will catch some beaver for myself." So as soon as the dog had left the place, the giant went to the river, and imitating the dog, drew out a stone. He was delighted to see it change into a fine fat beaver as soon as it touched the land. Tying it to his belt, he hastened home, shouting a good deal and brandishing the white feather about, as if he were prepared now to show them what he could do when he once tried. And when he reached home, he threw the beaver down, as is the custom, at the door of the lodge before he entered. After being seated a short time, he gave a dry cough and bade his wife bring in his hunting girdle. She made dispatch to obey him, and presently returned with the girdle, with nothing tied to it but a stone. The next day the dog, finding that his method of catching beavers had been discovered, went to a wood at some distance and broke off a charred limb from a burned tree. This limb instantly became a bear. The giant, who appeared to have lost faith in his hullabalooing, again watched him, did exactly as the dog had done, and carried a bear home, but his wife, when she came to go out for it, found nothing but a black stick tied to his belt. And so it happened with everything. Whatever the dog undertook prospered, whatever the giant attempted failed, and even his brave halloo had now died away to a feeble chirp. Every day the younger sister had reason to be more proud of the poor dog she had asked into her lodge, and every day the elder sister was made more aware that though she had married the white feather, the virtues of the magic plume were not the personal property of the noisy giant. At last the wife determined that she would go to her father and make known to him what a valuable husband she had, and how he furnished her lodge with a great abundance of sticks and stones, which he would pass upon her for bear and beaver. So when her husband had started for the hunt, she set out. As soon as these two had gone away from the neighborhood, the dog made signs to his mistress to sweat him after the manner of the Indians. He had always been a good dog, and she was willing to oblige him. She accordingly made a lodge just large enough for him to creep in. She then put in heated stones and poured water upon them, raising a vapor that filled the lodge and searched with its warmth to the very heart's core of the enchanted dog. When this had been kept up for the customary time, the enchanted dog was completely sweated away, and out came in his stead a very handsome young man. But unhappily he was without the power of speech. In taking away the form of the dog, it appears that the sweating lodge had also carried off his voice with it. Meantime the elder sister had reached her father's lodge, and had told him with much circumstance and a very long face how her sister was supporting an idle dog, and entertaining him as her husband. In her anxiety to make known her sister's affairs and the great scandal she was bringing upon the family, the elder sister forgot to say anything of the sticks and stones which her own husband brought home for bears and beavers. The old man, listening to his daughter, and suspecting that there was magic about, sent a deputation of young men and women to ask his younger daughter to come to him and to bring her dog along with her. When the deputation reached the lodge, they were surprised to find in the place of the dog a fine young man, and on announcing their message they all returned to the old chief, who was no less surprised at the change. He immediately assembled all the old and wise beads of the nation to come and be witnesses to the exploits which it was reported that the young man could perform. The sixth giant, although neither very old nor very wise, thrust himself in among the relations of the old chief. When they were all assembled and seated in a circle, the old chief took his pipe and filled it, and passed it to the Indians around to see if anything would happen when they smoked. They passed it on until it came to the dog, who made a sign that it should be handed first to the giant, and this was done. And the giant puffed with all his might, and shook the white feather upon his head, and swelled his chest, but nothing came of it except a great deal of smoke. The dog then took it himself. He made a sign to them to put the white feather upon his head. This was no sooner done than he recovered his speech, and beginning to draw upon the pipe at the same moment, behold, immense flocks of white and blue pigeons rushed from the smoke. Original, then White Feather, at the request of the company, faithfully recounted his history, and the sixth giant was known for what he was. So the old chief, who was a magician too, ordered that he should be transformed into a dog and turned into the middle of the village, where the boys could pelt him to death with clubs. This being done, the whole six giants were at an end and never troubled that neighborhood again forever after. The chief then gave out a further command, at the request of White Feather, that all the young men should employ themselves 4 days in making arrows. White Feather also asked for a buffalo robe. This he cut into thin shreds, and in the night went secretly and sowed them about the prairie in every direction. At the end of the 4 days, he invited the young men to gather together all of their arrows and to accompany him to a buffalo hunt. When they got out upon the prairie, they found it covered with a great herd of buffaloes. Of these they killed as many as they pleased, and afterward they had a grand festival in honor of White Feather's triumph over the giants. All this being pleasantly over, White Feather got his wife to ask her father's permission to go with him on a visit to his grandfather. The old chief replied that a woman must follow her husband into whatever quarter of the world he may choose to go. So bidding farewell to all his friends, White Feather placed the plume in his frontlet, took his war club in his hand, and led the way into the forest, followed by his faithful wife.